Welcome to the Queen City Music Podcast, the podcast devoted to the local music scene in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, here's your host, Matthew Ablin.
Hello and welcome to episode 28 of the Queen City Music Podcast. If you've been a listener of the QCMP, you'll know that the guests on the podcast are from all walks of life in the Charlotte music scene. This month is, of course, no different, and I'm fortunate enough to speak with film composer Bryan Holt. Bryan is a talented artist who's been able to carve out a niche in the music community, as well as provide a service to the budding film scene here in the Queen City. Hey, Bryan, thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's get things started. Are you originally from the Charlotte area?
No, unlike much like quite a few other people. In fact, I was born in New Mexico, Alamogordo, New Mexico. Grew up in Virginia.
All right.
And moved to Charlotte in 2008.
And what brought you down to Charlotte from New Mexico? That's out west, beautiful scenery, and then you come to Charlotte. Not that Charlotte doesn't have some beautiful scenery.
We came down from Virginia. So
okay.
I grew up in Virginia.
Gotcha.
Born in New Mexico, grew up in Virginia, and my brother moved down in 2001. Started having the first kids of our generation, and also had musician buddies move down the same year.
Okay.
So I'd been visiting, for about 7 years or so, coming down, visiting the brother, and then sitting in with the bands, and before I decided to call Charlotte home. And, yeah.
Well, what's your music background? Because you talk about bands and things. So what's your background?
Yeah. Started piano lessons at 4.
All right.
And had 11 years of lessons till I was about 15. Played trumpet in school, probably starting from, 5th grade band, and continued that all the way through kind of a pretty elite level at James Madison University. Played 2 years as a part of the Marching Royal Dukes. Just 1 year before they got the Sutler Trophy in '95, which is kind of an esteemed best band in the nation. Huge. I mean, we had at JMU in the Marching Royal Dukes, we had 55 trumpets in my section.
Wow.
And that was the size of my entire high school band, right? So I think our band was 415 members strong at that time.
Goodness.
In James Madison University, I was studying voice, so I was a vocal music major at the time. So,
right.
So that's kind of like the schooling aspect through college years, and then for 15 years on and off in my 20s and 30s, was playing piano in bar bands and pounding the rock and the blues and the funk for quite a few years up in Virginia. Number of different bands, cover bands and original bands, and we had an 8-piece funk band called On the Eights for a while with a horn section, and then I was playing with a few bands down here in Charlotte, sitting with Haywire on occasion, and then played with Incognito Mosquito for a few years, and so I've been on the stage for a long time, kind of sit behind the keys.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So when I met you, we talked about this earlier before we started recording, but I met Bryan during the summer this year in 2019, because this podcast will be coming out in January of 2020. We met in 2019 during the summer. Bryan was doing a class at Camp North End about film composing and audio production for the 48-hour film project, which
right.
we'll get into later. You can tell us a bit about that, because
Sure.
I know you got a lot of friends in that area. But you're a film composer, so I went to this class to see what it was all about, and I hadn't been to Camp North End. How did you get involved in film composition? What's your background with that?
Let's see. In 2012, I'd been here in Charlotte, 2008 to 12. Moved back to Virginia and started working with a game studio company, a mobile game studio. Okay. Old high school friends and buddies. And my younger brother, Sean, worked for the company. So we were kind of just a rogue startup, designing location-based games for Android and iPhone. So a lot like Google's Ingress or the Pokemon Go kind of thing. I was doing kind of odds and ends for them. I wasn't doing music. I was doing social media, and I was interim director of marketing and And at some point, they asked me if I'd like to score the music for the game. And I'd never considered it and just thought, what the heck? Give it a go. And so I started kind of just teaching myself. At the time, I was on a MacBook Pro laptop. I started in Ableton. That was my digital audio workstation, my DAW of choice at the time. And then quickly found out just how much processing power it took to actually do multi-tracking, kind of big scoring, and it was kind of blowing through the processing power of the laptop after a year or two. But it was kind of a cool opportunity because it gave me kind of a low stakes, low stress kind of environment with old friends and family to cut my teeth a little bit and just no harm, no foul. Just see if you can do this. Just try. Just I'd never written before. I'd played a lot. I played in bands, but I was never a songwriter.
Okay.
Not classically trained in terms of composition either or theory, even though I was at music school as a vocalist and pianist in the Navy for a short while. So I started in 2012 with Raincrow Studios, game studio. And then after about a year and a half, I decided I was at the point where I was outdoing my computer's capabilities and needed to decide whether I was going to dip my feet in further.
Sure.
Which would mean investing further in gear and software and really kind of, making a commitment.
So prior to doing the recording, the film scoring or the video game scoring, you weren't doing any recording.
No,
this is your first dive into getting a digital audio workstation going. And
back in the 90s, 90s and early 2000s with friends, bands in Virginia and studios, we did all kinds of multi-tracking. And for a while, I traveled around with a Roland VS 2480. I don't know if you remember those, a big digital hard disk recorder.
Right.
I was into recording, but not writing. So my kind of entry out of, I was playing in bands, and then for a while my interest was doing that as well as recording the live shows.
Gotcha.
Multi-track recording, and then I was trying my hand at mixing and mastering the shows, taking live multi-tracked concerts and then taking them home, and every single microphone from the drum set and the guitar cab and the vocal mics, and putting a live show back together and mixing it down.
Nice.
So I'd cart that thing around to concerts with my Snake and like 18 XLR cords and like talk to the sound guy. Hey, can I take auxiliary outs from your soundboard and record this concert? So
nice.
So I was doing that for a while. But prior to writing the game music for Raincrow Studios, I had not written.
Okay.
So I was not a writer prior to writing for Raincrow Studios. And then kind of caught the bug a little bit and got to the point where my system was outdoing my system's capabilities, processing power, and decided to commit, and ended up building a $3,000 Hackintosh desktop. So I was in the Mac realm,
right,
but wanted to go up, and I couldn't afford to buy into Mac Pro at the time. And at the time, I think they just come out with the Mac Trashcan Pro. So they were in this crazy like number of years where it seemed they were actually stepping away from supporting Mac Pro for professional audio.
Sure.
We didn't know what they were doing. But we knew what they were doing was extremely expensive. To get into what my processing power that I had, I would have had to spend about $12,000 in the Mac world. So I researched how to do a Hackintosh, which is to build the PC and turn it into a Mac, right?
Yeah.
That's in and of itself a pretty big commitment, $3,000 computer to take the next step in audio in the composition.
Wow.
And that doesn't even account for the software and Pro Tools and Cubase and Ableton and all the virtual instruments beyond that. So just started kind of doing it with the game studio, and then ended up moving back down to the Charlotte area in 2015, at which point I kind of entered back to the city with new vision. I had prior communities where I was in circles, live band circles.
Okay.
I kind of dropped back in. I I'd been in gaming for a little bit, and then kind of had my eye on film.
Okay.
Right. So I thought, well, all right, I got to meet some new people. I don't know any film people. So in 2016 was when I scored my first film.
Well, how did you break into, that whole thing? You just got into town. You're like, I want to get into this. I mean, it's not like you just go to the bar, a local bar where film people hang out. You're like, hey, how are you? Well, how did you?
Well, I guess I'd been
make some inroads.
I guess I'd been writing for Rancor Studios for a few years at that point, and I don't know. I mean, I just started going to some local events. I was just looking for local community gatherings. Mm-hmm. I suppose the first one I found was the Charlotte 48-hour film project.
Right.
Noticed they were putting an event on that summer in 2016. I think they do it each year in August.
Okay.
So let me see. I came here in December 15. Yeah. So about 7 months in, I just I started introducing myself around and came out to see what this was all about, and ended up jumping into the 48-hour competition that year for the first year, and I was kind of off to the races after that. Introduced me to a whole new group of folks and directors and writers, and met Will Fisher at that time, who's been a wonderful local champion of film. He directs the Charlotte 48-hour film project.
Okay.
And kind of went from there, yeah. So that was my first experience.
Pretty neat, man.
Yeah.
So you've had I think the best way to describe it is you kind of started building your career from the ground up, because, as you said, you didn't go through a formal film scoring
That's right.
College program, and then learning how to do the DAWs,
Mm-hmm.
and then just getting to meet people. So it was like
Yeah.
very organic. It seems like
Yeah.
that your career started to take off. It's just building up.
Yeah, I'm completely self-taught. So.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
Man.
I mean, aside from the traditional background in piano and voice and trumpet in school, all the composition for film, and the mixing and mastering that has to come along with writing your own music and trying to write to a production level that's competitive.
Mm-hmm.
It's all self-taught. You just have to figure out how to do it. Yeah.
So what was the learning curve like? Was it frustrating? was it something that you were just like, well, heck, I'm going to jump into this and let me see what I got. What's the learning curve?
Huge. Yeah. It's been huge. From every angle, in fact. So, but the stakes were low, right? So you're doing the 48-hour film project, and it's a wonderful format that allows for all levels of filmmakers to come together.
Okay.
And for a very short period of time, relatively decent commitment. You're committed for 2 days, in and out, maybe a few weeks in and around that if you're going to actually finish a film for an official release.
Right.
So you're not in it for like 3 or 4 months. You're not taking something huge on. You dip in and you dip out. And there's not a tremendous amount of pressure to come up with something that anyone should expect is amazing. So
right.
If you happen to, then it's just a bonus, really. So I kind of learned under fire, really, in a couple of those competitions, and then bit by bit just got. I just learned with every single film that I do. So new challenges would come up. So whether it was learning deeper functions in Cubase, or switching actually I switched from Ableton to Pro Tools initially.
And just for anybody listening,
Yep.
Cubase, Ableton, Pro Tools, these are all just digital audio workstations. They're things that you plug into and record your music.
Yes, the primary environment you're working in the computer. Yeah, to write and record and mix and master the music. So there was a huge learning curve just in and of itself on each one of those DAWs.
Yeah.
Different, key shortcuts, different workflows. In general, mixing music, mastering music, understanding EQ and compression and some of these very detailed techniques of refining and finishing off music were all learning curves, continue to be learning curves for me.
Right.
Which I've loved, though. I adore just kind of getting down into the software, and the nitty gritty, and getting better at it each time. And then you add to that working in the medium of film, which I'd never done before. 2016 was completely new. So, and I'm still learning every time I take on a film. So the learning curve is pretty serious, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
So for anybody, do you have any advice for somebody just trying to get into the film scoring thing? Do you think going through a formal program might be a better track, or because, with the advent of YouTube and there's a lot of online schools for learning now, do you think that's also a good route?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it would depend on the person and where they are and what they want to get out of it. But I think these days people have to take very seriously the consideration of taking on debt.
Yeah.
In order to get an education, you have to really consider what that piece of paper gets you on the back end.
Right.
You have to be able to get work to start paying that education off. Now, I think a traditional education would go a long way to giving someone
as my cat
a leg up, for sure. I would certainly have preferred to have a certain amount of education more than I do.
Right.
It would, teaching yourself can be exhausting. It's a constant uphill swing on,
Well, just as we talked about before the podcast, I just trying to make a living in music in general.
Yeah.
Just because you go to school and get a degree does not guarantee you're gonna, you're gonna get out. I went to school for guitar, and I'm a music educator during the day. I mean, that's what I went for. And then I have friends who went to school for film scoring, as we talked about, and it's not like they got out of film with a film scoring degree and walked into Universal Studios and went, "Hey, I'd like to score $1 million project right now."
That's right,
and it's not the way it works.
Yeah, and then I'm sure there are other benefits that I'm not considering. I know a lot of these programs have job placement and networking opportunities, and frankly, just the mentorship I think is huge. Just seeing people who've been in the industry for ages,
right?
Having access to world-class equipment. I think education can be wonderful, but I think there are alternative avenues for that these days more than ever before.
Yeah.
And there are other types of programs that you can plug in that are structured, that aren't in a traditional 4-year university setting too. So there's a lot of wonderful alternative avenues for education. So
there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff out there, and maybe somebody might say, "Hey, I want to get into film scoring. Let me see what I could do on my own first."
Sure.
And then maybe at some point I can jump into some kind of program to fill in those gaps that I lack. All right, man. So how many films have you scored?
I think it's somewhere. I was trying to figure that out just recently. I think I'm somewhere around about 27 films.
Wow.
And then about 3 or 4 short commercials, Kickstarter projects, charity documentary. So there's a few other kind of corporate video kind of things. So yeah. So
your area of film, is it mostly independent short films, or are you
so far?
Okay.
Yeah. So far predominantly short films. Had one kind of longer, close to feature. It's kind of a Muppet style musical, which is super challenging. And then I believe I have my first feature coming up. We're still kind of in negotiations around, who's working on it and what the roles are going to be. But that will be for sound design, not music. Mm-hmm. I believe I'm doing that with CLT Productions. Kurt and Sarah Braden over there, wonderful, doing a lot of good work in the area. So yeah, I think it's traditionally the case that people will start with shorts.
So what's the length of a short film? What did they average, 2 minutes to 15 minutes? What's the length?
The shortest I've seen, or that I've worked on, is a 4 minute.
Okay.
I know that the Made in Carolinas competition, which is sponsored by Carolina Film Community, I think they cap those at 4 minutes specifically. So it kind of depends on the festival or the competition. Because a lot of times these are written for competitions. They're written with the destination in mind.
Okay.
Or a lot of times shorts are written kind of as a proof of concept, which is also a common kind of avenue to gaining interest for investors for a longer feature. So they'll take a long script or an idea for a feature script and create a proof of concept with a short film.
Okay.
And to the highest production level that they can. And then they've got a viable short piece of art to shop.
Right.
To look for investment to go the full road for the feature set. A lot of 7 to 10 minutes. I don't know if there's some sort of absolute limit on a short, which is, but I think maybe max 15, 17-minute range.
Right.
There might be something beyond a short between a feature. I don't know if that actually has a name. Featurette, maybe, something like that. And a feature, I guess, is somewhere between hour and 90 minutes, 2 hours, 2.5.
Right. Yeah. Can we take a listen to some of your music?
Yeah, you bet, man.
All right, let's take a listen to The Black Plague Was Fun. That's from the 2017 short film, Tripped. Check it out. All right, so fill us in on this track. What's this about?
Yeah, this was really fun. This movie was a short called Tripped. It was written for, I believe it was the Chicago 48-hour film project. I might be wrong on that one. I made this with T.C. DeWitt, the director and writer. He's a brilliant comedic writer.
Okay.
It's a film about a time traveling application, like an Uber type of application called Tripped, and you travel through time. And so basically the whole movie is the inside of this tripped vehicle where the driver is picking up people traveling across time. And so all the characters are from different ages and different stages.
Neat.
And the ask for the film was basically to have a different style of music for every single new passenger that got in the car, which was really tricky, especially considering it was a 48. So that was in short order, come up with a lot of different styles of music. So this character that gets in the back seat is an exterminator dressed up in this full chemical protection suit. Sits down in the back car, and he's like super optimistic and energetic, and he's just come back from the dark ages in London, where he was exterminating rats during the Black Plague, and he was just completely psyched about it. He was like, it was awesome. There's so much work, man. And so the fun challenge on that one is, sometimes you can be scoring exactly what's on the screen with music. Sometimes you're underscoring something that isn't seen. You can do a lot with to kind of play around with the viewer's emotions, or to kind of play against picture or to picture. So sometimes the angle in isn't terribly obvious, but this was just a really fun chance to like do something. I don't know. I just thought, okay, what could I do that would match or be a total surprise perhaps behind this scene? And I just got the idea to do, to score his excitement and kind of like almost like it was a romantic vacation where he was going to like clean up the Black Plague. And so I somewhere in my brain got the notion to write kind of like a 1950s romantic bubblegum kind of orchestral piece.
Because of course the Black Plague was fun for everyone.
Yeah, why
involved.
not, right? Yeah.
All right, so another track that you brought with you is from the 2018 film Coventown. Mm-hmm. Now, this is something you won Best Original Score for.
Right.
Fill us in. What was this film written for? What was this film about?
Coventown was directed and written by the Rita brothers, Mike and Jack Rita, for the Greensboro 48-hour film project horror edition. So they have a horror edition every October.
Very cool.
Again, all short films, all made in 48 hours. And the premise of Coventown, we follow this young lady who basically breaks down in a remote urban neighborhood, and then finds herself in this strange, I don't know how to describe it, like almost like she's in some sort of parallel reality where every year at this time in this neighborhood, I don't know if it's further than it, but our scope of understanding is we're in this neighborhood in a very normal looking North Carolina kind of suburb, and it could be anywhere neighborhood. And the tradition on Halloween or on this night every year is that real witches come out and people are haunted. And they're on guard. So they're terrified. Meanwhile, she's walking into the scene that our protagonist, I guess she is the young lady who breaks down, played by Eden Lee, amazing friend and actress here. She doesn't have any clue what's going on. So she's going knocking on doors. Meanwhile, the neighbors are like cracking the doors open, freaking out, thinking, don't you know what trouble you could get us in? Don't you know what's about to go down here? You know, the witches are about to come out. We have to give them offerings. So basically the witches come around, they knock on the doors and they say trick or treat, and you have to give them an offering to basically stay alive, right? Yeah. So this all goes wrong basically, and as we could maybe suspect. And the clip that I brought for this was not just the music, but it was the actual audio of the film, kind of close to the end, to the very end, so including the end credits. So we hear Eden in her car, and she's almost gotten away from the scene, but she forgets her phone in one of the houses. So she has to go back to the house. So we hear her getting out of her car, walking across the neighborhood, and knocking on the door. And of course, when she knocks on the door, no one's there. Leading up to this, I'm also teasing this with some really deep sound design. Mm-hmm. So this is an interesting film where most of it isn't very musical to one original score, but it's a horror film and kind of a thriller. So you really are just kind of setting the tone with sound design a lot of times, and underscore. So I build this up to a point where she walks into the house and it's really quiet and it's not okay. There's something's gonna be right around the corner, right? And there's a classic technique in horror films called a jump scare. Mm-hmm. And the jump scare is exactly what you would imagine it might be. You jump and scare, right?
Right.
And it's a big hit. It's a big shift. And usually it happens with the camera and it happens with the audio at the same time. And then when you bring them together, it's an amazing effect. So we hear that. We hear the reveal in the kitchen of this horrific scene, and then the end titles of the film. So that's what I brought.
Well, let's check out the clip from Coventown.
All right.
Yeah, I think I left my phone here.
That's pretty neat. So I'm thinking, as a musician, a film composer, do you have to do your research, quote unquote, for different types of films? So you're in one hand, you're composing for a horror film, and you've got to know the jump scare part. You've got to know that that's a thing.
Sure.
But then on the other part, for Tripped, you're writing this like dreamy 50s style. So are you? I can't imagine, those two dichotomies of styles of writing. Are you doing research, like listening to other horror films to see what folks are doing, and then listening to other styles to figure all this out?
Sometimes, it kind of depends on the project. And sometimes it's just kind of from my imagination, frankly. I'm kind of watching the film and it's an amazing thing to watch a film with no music. I can remember doing that for the first time and thinking, wow, okay, I have to write music from nothing.
Right.
I have to find something from nowhere based on what I'm seeing in front of me. I actually have to fill this out. This has to come from me somehow. I don't know. Yeah, it's amazing.
Does it make it easier or harder to have the film in front of you so that you have a visual? Like if you're sitting writing a song, or you just decide to write music, you're kind of going on your own whim.
Yeah, easier for sure to a degree, right? If you're just writing music for yourself, let's say, if I was writing a solo album, even if I wanted to write a solo piece of cinematic music, an album of cinematically styled music, it would be far easier in one sense to simply write with no boundaries.
Right.
Do whatever I want to do, as long as it sounds good.
Right.
It is good. That's it, right? If you're writing the film, you're limited by the amount of time you have, by what's happening on the screen, by how much dialogue there is, what the sound design is like in the mix. You have to make sure you're scoring around the sound design, not getting in the way of dialogue. It's full of boundaries and constrictions and limitations. So you are limited by you absolutely have to write within a framework, and you're writing for somebody else's project. So you're writing for a director who has to give you the okay on it. Ultimately, you can spend all this time writing a cue and think it's the best thing ever, and hand it to them, and they say, it wasn't really what I meant by it. Sounded kind of blue to me, So you just have to kind of be a mind reader sometimes. And
what's the length? So you're doing short films, and I think some of the cues I've listened to that you've done are like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And then
or even less.
The length. So what's what is the length of things you could do? A 10-second to like 2 minutes, or what's that time frame?
I guess it just depends. There's no set rule, really. It just depends on the pacing of the film, and what they've created, what they're trying to create, or what the music needs to say. Right. A lot of times, the cues can really be as short as 5 to 10 seconds, and it's really just a quick, undertone to something happening on the screen, and it's really not meant to take the focus, or maybe it is. It can be a huge, big jump scare that pounds out, and it hits, and then it dissipates, and it's like 8 seconds of reverb, and that's it. That's the cue. That's that hit. And then it can be an opening title or an end title, which will often range from a minute and a half to maybe 3 or 4 minutes of music, proper length of, or like a small suite. Yeah, so I don't know. It just kind of depends.
All right. Well, let's take a listen to something that's more recent for you. The 2019 short film, Disconnect. This is something that you won the best music for. Can you fill us in on the award? What was this? What was the film for? What was the award you won?
Yeah, the award was best music awarded by, I think it was topindiefilmawards.com.
Okay.
I believe there were, the way they do that, they award seasonally. So this was the summer 2019 portion of the Top Indie Film Awards. And for best music, I think there were 15 of us worldwide that won. And there might have been another 30 or so nominees listed under that on the website. I have no idea how many entries there were worldwide, but it's kind of an international funnel of films submitted during that period of the year. I think that's sponsored by filmfreeway.com. So yeah, I was honored for the best music for Disconnect. This was directed, written by Trey Riley. I love working with Trey. We've done a few films over the last few years, and Disconnect is currently on the film festival circuit. By the time this episode comes out, I think it may be released January, February 2020, or it may still be on the circuit. Sometimes a film will go on the circuit,
right,
and then you'll kind of delay the official release online, and that's how we've decided to do it with Disconnect. So we're just showing it at film festivals at the time.
We'll try to put some links to the different films in the show notes. So that hopefully, if somebody's listening,
it's a very touching tale. It's a family drama around a not a split family, but a joined family. A mother with a child and a father with a child come together, and the family loses the mother to a car accident. So this follows these young ladies and this father who's left totally, this horrific accident, and they're left to pull their lives back together and figure out how to make it all work. And so that was the tone of the film. And I'm not sure which track that we've gotten here. I believe this was
MX 011 1
end
M8.
credit?
Yeah, end credit, I believe so.
Yeah. I think this was the end of the film.
Well, let's take a listen.
All right, sounds good.
Bryan, so these are past films you've worked on for the last few years. What do you have coming up?
Well, right now I'm finishing sound design on a film called The Postman, directed by Noah Campagna. That's out of Atlanta. It's a fun kind of a throwback. It's set in the 1940s, so it's a really interesting challenge in terms of coming up with traditional car sounds from that era, 1945 cars, and all kinds of things like that. And the short film Portent that we debuted at Made in Carolinas. We have an extended version of that, a longer short, a 9-minute short. It was directed by Mike Rita. We're finishing that off for official release. And then we have an upcoming film called Live, L-I-V. And this will be Eden Lee's directorial debut, Eden and Mike Rita as well. So a couple things in the mix. And then perhaps my first feature sound design through CLT Productions on the horizon. So excited about that.
Yeah, so you did mention earlier that you're not just doing the film composing, you're also involved in audio production and sound design work.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
what's that all about?
Well, it's basically all the audio in a film that isn't music.
Okay.
So every other bit of sound. So what a lot of people don't realize is that how much work goes into actually making a film sound good, let alone sound like it's supposed to sound. Mm-hmm. It's supposed to kind of be invisible that it sounds good, right?
Right.
It's kind of, your work is supposed to disappear while someone just gets involved in the story. You're not
Right.
supposed to necessarily understand. Sometimes sound features, of course, and you think, wow, that's an amazing sound behind that scene, or whatever the case may be. But I started realizing a few years back, somewhere around 2017, that a lot of films had, especially at the independent level, had tremendous audio issues. Whether that was audio capture on site or finishing the actual film, the audio of the film,
Okay.
and mostly the finish of it. And that, filmmaking has been democratized now. I mean, you can get tremendous value for your money on all kinds of parts of the production. Mm-hmm. So films are looking better than ever now. But I still found that while they're looking amazing, they weren't sounding amazing.
Right.
And the interesting thing about the human brain is we can be more forgiving of a bad picture than we can of bad audio when in this film, in the format of film.
Right.
So if we're watching a beautiful looking film that sounds horrible, we won't be able to continue watching with the same kind of focus. If we have amazing audio, but the picture is lacking, our brain will have a different capacity to make it through that film.
Right.
So audio is really important. So I just kind of at that time thought, I think there's an opportunity here to not only learn something more myself, but perhaps learn a secondary skill set, a parallel skill set, using exactly, for the most part, the same gear that I'm using already in software. I did have to make some extra investments. Mm-hmm. So I invested in the industry standard, Hollywood standard software called Isotope RX Advanced. It's about a $1,500 investment to get in the door on that. And I've been self-teaching for the last few years. And so that's everything from taking dialogue, rough dialogue off a movie set and cleaning it up. So if there's wind in the background or differences in audio levels, compressing it so that it sounds, so the delivery sounds good. Sometimes there's been background noise that just, the film would just be dead if you couldn't get the audio out of it. In fact, for Coventown that we previewed a little bit of earlier, that was one of my biggest sound design challenges. They filmed in proximity to PNC Music Pavilion, right? And this was supposed to be this quiet outdoor neighborhood that was in the middle of nowhere. Meanwhile, there was a concert going on right over the hill, like within a mile range. And you could really hear the music in the audio, and they couldn't reshoot the whole film. So I got that film with this concert in the background and had to somehow take the concert out in the middle of the dialogue across the whole film in these very quiet front porch scenes, quiet dialogue scenes. It was a tremendous effort. I was just winging it, man. I didn't know what I was doing, really just teaching myself, but I finally figured out how to clean that audio up. But it's those kinds of challenges. Cell phones go off in the middle of a take and they can't get the actors back to redo it again. They didn't realize the take was bad until they got it into the editing room, and just normal stuff, wind in the background, de-winding noise. And then the actual designing of the sound. So a lot of times what you're doing on set is your priority is to be capturing the dialogue. But there's all this other sound in the world that goes on around us, like refrigerators in the background and cars driving by in the distance and birds chirping in the trees and slight breeze in the leaves of the trees and all the sound that makes the world real to us, but which isn't always actually recorded in the process of capturing the scene in a film.
Sure.
So it has to be designed, and that's the design aspect, the sound design aspect. So you have to actually design the sound of the world in and around a film to make it come to life.
I don't think people, when they watch a film, I don't think they realize how quote unquote fake it is.
Unbelievable.
Like,
it's
they
amazing.
don't even know that, there's these swords are not actually making these sounds. There's somebody in a studio somewhere went in and put the sword sounds in.
So in The Postman, there's these two postmen walking down the street in this scene. So I'm actually designing all of their footsteps, every little bit of their footsteps, the clothing rustle of the bag when they flip it around the side of their body, all the little subtle things, the sound of the mailbox when it opens and closes that wasn't captured on microphone. So all of that's done in post. So I've been learning that skill set the last couple of years, and it's kind of a really cool mix.
So you're doing what it's called Foley.
So technically, Foley is one aspect of the overall sound design team. In traditional large films, there'll be what are called Foley artists. And they're actually set up in their own sound stage. They have the film screened up against, a full screen, and it's like a warehouse of all of these trinkets and bits and pieces. And they have these pits that are designed with all these different like little sandboxes. They look like little sandboxes, square sandboxes. And they'll have all kinds of sand and gravel and different types of tile and basically everything that you might be walking on in a film or making sounds with clothing sounds and things like that. So they're actually performing the sound design to the film. So I am actually, part of what I'm doing is considered Foley, and Foley is mostly the design of the sound of the human, right? Okay. The sound of the clothing, the sound they make with their feet, and then everything else around that. So it's part Foley, it's part sound design, it's part audio cleanup, and then really performing the final balancing of the entire soundtrack of the film. So the sound design with the dialogue, and the dialogue and the sound design with the music. Right. For the final loudness, spec, and delivery. And that's super complicated too, as things have changed the last couple of years, international loudness standards, and depending on where you're delivering the film, are you going to screen, are you going to broadcast in the US or in Europe, or whether you're delivering for YouTube or Vimeo or going straight to Spotify for a soundtrack, all of them have their own delivery standards, loudness specifications. Right. So that's also part of the skill set, is knowing that mastering stage, how you're actually delivering the final spec.
Neat.
Yeah.
So also you're doing the film composing, you're doing this post audio production and sound design work, and now you're also adding some teaching in. What are you doing with teaching?
So the last year, you and I met at the 48-hour film project Lead Up. They do kind of a summer series where they do educational workshops for filmmaking, and mostly for beginner and intermediate filmmakers. So I did a film and sound design class this past summer for 48. And then recently had the pleasure of working with Julie McElmurray and the Charlotte Unconventional Film School, teaching a very similar format, basically music and sound design for beginners. And then started some private lessons. I'm open for private teaching as well, for beginning film composers or people who are working in Pro Tools or Cubase and want to understand how to get around their software a little better, or just getting into the world of complicated world of using virtual instruments in a digital realm. And so, doing some private lessons.
That sounds pretty neat.
Yeah, it's cool. I really love teaching.
So it's definitely what I always say is multiple income streams for musicians. You got to have a lot of stuff going on.
That's the name of the game, man. That's the name of the game.
So Bryan, how can people get in touch with you if they want to find out more about Bryan Holt, or if they want to take lessons, or if they have a film that they're working on, they want to get some work done on? How do we get in touch with you?
Well, my website is bryanholt.us. It's bryanholt.us. You can find me on Twitter at Bryan Holt, Instagram at Bryan Holt, and Facebook at Bryan Holt Music.
All right, I'll put that in the show notes, all with the different links to get in touch with you.
All right, man.
Thanks for coming on, Bryan. I really appreciate it. It was a
Matt,
great talk today.
Yeah,
man.
it's been my pleasure, man. Really nice to hang out.
All right, dude. Have a great day.
Thanks.
And that will bring episode 28 of the Queen City Music Podcast to a close. If you have an idea for the podcast or would like to be a guest on the QCMP, reach out to me at qcmusicpodcast@gmail.com. Also, please check out our partners, New Sound at newsoundonline.com and Records on the Wall at rexonthewall.com. Until next month, get out there and support your local music scene by going to hear some of the talented musicians that call the city home. Bye.